Welcome to the Women in Fishing Podcast. I'm Chris Woodward. The Women in Fishing Podcast is sponsored by Axo Noble Yacht Coatings, makers of Interlux and All Grip products for boats. So let's talk today about kayak fishing. My guests are Christi Holmes. Christi is a registered Maine guide, outdoor writer, Appalachian Trail thru hiker, and founder of Maine Women Hunters. She's an ambassador for Old Town Canoes and spends much of her free time on the water, ice fishing, fly fishing, and offshore fishing. Bri Andrassy. Bri caught her first keeper at age 3 and has been hooked ever since. She lives in Florida and is a member of the Hobie fishing team. Off the water, she's a full-time professor with a passion for global healthcare. Welcome, y'all.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, y'all come from some interesting backgrounds. I really love it. Let me start first. Christi, tell me a little bit about your past fishing experience and what species you really like to target and where.
Yeah, thanks again for having me on. Excited to, talk fishing with the girls. I live up in Maine, so our season is short, but a lot of inshore fishing for trout. We have landlocked salmon in Maine, and then offshore for striped bass. That's basically what I target from the kayak.
From the kayak. Okay. And Bri, what about you?
So inshore, I target snook, and then offshore, I am always trying to catch a sailfish. So anytime I get that chance at catching a billfish, that is all I'm trying to do.
Are you from Florida originally?
I'm not. I'm originally from New Jersey, so the Northeast, and I've been down here for about 11 years.
Oh, okay, great. And so do you fish freshwater too?
I will fish freshwater. I grew up fishing freshwater up in New Jersey. I will say if there's any chance for me to get offshore, conditions wise, that's what I'm going to do.
Gotcha.
But we have great bass fishing here. We have peacock bass, and we also have the clown knife fish down in South Florida.
There's some interesting fisheries down there. So let's start by talking about how y'all got involved in kayak fishing. Christi, I'll start with you. What is it about kayak fishing that attracted you and lured you in? Why did you start?
Growing up in Maine, we have a ton of little ponds, and it seems like every family has like the family camp, we call them, but they're little cabins, and everyone has an Old Town canoe on the lawn. With Old Town being in Maine, you go their scratch and dent sale every year growing up. So it was pretty ubiquitous. Just everyone had one. It was affordable. And then to transition to fishing from the kayak, it really appealed to me because it was something I could do by myself. I'm not backing up this big trailer with a big boat. It's more affordable. I mean, you can definitely spend a couple $1,000s on a nice kayak, but it's more affordable, more entry level. It's something I can do alone. And I really like how physically you're like connected to the water and you feel each movement of the waves, and, fighting a fish. It just feels more personal from a kayak.
Good, definitely. Bri, how about you?
I got started. Somebody invited me to go offshore to catch tuna, and I thought, you're catching tuna from a kayak? Are you kidding? I was very much inshore paddleboard fishing at that point, and got to try one of the pedal drives out. It was like a older Hobie, and my mind was just blown. I was like, you can go out here, you're catching the same fish that sport fisher is catching. I was hooked. Like I said, billfish have been my heartbeat for as long as I can remember. Hooking up on a sailfish and getting towed, that is what I long for. That is what I think about when I'm sitting in my office. And all I want to do right now is just get offshore and get towed.
And fortunately for you, you can fish pretty much most days of the year because of the weather. Poor Christi has to limit that time that she's able to do a fishing outing unless she goes somewhere farther south. So how easy or hard is it to get into kayak fishing, Christi?
I mean, you can fish from any kayak. You can fish from, the $200 kayak from Sam's Club. Like, but that eventually, you'll kind of see what you like and don't like, how much more room you wish you had. But I mean, you could just do it with a basic kayak, but it's nice to have your hands free.
There's not a lot of barriers in terms of being able to figure it out and
Right.
get started. Yeah. Okay. How about you, Bri? Do you agree with that, or you think it's?
I agree with that for inshore, definitely inshore freshwater. When it comes to launching from the beach to go offshore, that's when it gets a little bit trickier for somebody who's new. So you want to be able to learn the conditions, know what it means when it's 3 foot, 4 foot, and the intervals, how long in between the waves. So if you're going to be pushing through and breaking through that chop, what is it going to look like for you being offshore and launching that way? I would say a pedal drive is very important for offshore, whereas inshore freshwater, you could probably do the hand paddle, no problem. I just know from capsizing one too many times that having a pedal drive is really helpful. So offshore wise, pedal drive, inshore freshwater, hand paddle, pedal drive. I think you're able to get into that pretty easily.
Okay. So, yeah, I mean, generally the advice would be if you want to get started in kayak fishing, start inshore or freshwater and then kind of move into the offshore realm if that's where your head is. So, and what kind of kayak do you recommend somebody who's first getting into it to buy, Christi? And then for any current angler who just, maybe has been fishing from a boat for a long time, but now wants to get into kayak fishing and is, or even downsizing from a power boat. Kind of give me two ideas of what you'd get the first timer and what you'd get the seasoned angler.
I always tell people, if you can get out and try one before you purchase one, that's really helpful. People have different preferences. Start with the kayak you own if you already have one. And then you'll have something to compare with and say like, oh, this was really annoying. A, B, and C were really annoying. And then see if you can borrow one, go to your local shop, sit in them. The chairs are big. If you're going to be fishing for hours, which usually I am, you guys probably are too, like the chairs and the comfort's really important. Durability, stability is huge on the ocean and waves. So yeah, Hobie makes great kayaks and Old Town makes great kayaks. Old Town I have the Sportsman Salty PDL. So it's a pedal drive. And then I also have the Sportsman Autopilot. So it has a inline built-in trolling motor, which kind of feels like cheating sometimes, but it's really nice.
Yeah.
A lot of deck space, great for when I'm fly fishing.
Yeah. So obviously these days, sit on top is the only way to go for a fisherman for the most part. Yeah. And then we're also talking about, what boat fits you and your strength level, your size and your weight and all those types of things have to kind of come into play. Bri, what do you suggest for beginners in particular, and then maybe for other folks?
For my experience of using the Hobie kayaks, I would say for a beginner, you would want to go with the Hobie Passport 12 or I think it's 10.5 or something like that. It's not going to run super expensive. It's a good entry level. It has the fishing poles, but it's like your simple, broken down, basic pedal drive kayak. Look at the weight of the kayaks and determine what you want to load, unload, all the gear that you're going to bring, how many trips that's going to be to the water's edge. That was a big thing for me. I would say the Passport 12 or the 10.5 is great as an entry level kayak, pedal drive kayak. It's not going to break the bank. And it's a basic setup. You have your fishing poles in the back, you have a little area for your gear, and it's not super heavy. I think it was around 65 pounds. So determine what you want to carry to the water, how much gear you're going to bring with you. That was one of my main reasons in switching from a Hobie Outback, which was the perfect offshore vessel, coming back in after being offshore all day and carrying it up the beach to the truck. I was exhausted. You go out offshore, you're out there for 8-10 hours, and then you're lugging all the gear back in. So I was looking for a vessel that was more simple, lighter, and that's why I landed with the Passport 12. But I definitely think if you're more expert, you're wanting to spend some money on this and invest into it, that Outback was an excellent option.
Yeah, definitely. There are some different things to consider for women who are getting involved in kayak fishing. I mean, I'm a fairly petite sized female. I'm only 5'1". I tried to maintain some strength so that I can keep doing all this, but I opted for a fairly lightweight kayak that wasn't quite as tricked out. But it is important too, if you happen to be a bigger angler who weighs more, you have to look at the weight that the kayak can hold and carry too, because we don't necessarily think about all that too much as females. I know, some of the bigger guys, they're really restricted to having to get kind of the bigger, broader, beamier platforms compared to what we're able to get away with. But yeah, I mean, having to drag it across the sand or even pull it up and down an inclined boat ramp can be a challenge. So those things certainly need to be considered. Christi, how do you transport your kayak to and from the water? And what are some considerations for newcomers coming to the sport?
Yeah, as a female, especially if you like fishing alone, it's going to be a huge consideration. I have a forerunner, so I can put it up there, but it kind of scratches my, I don't know what it's called, top bumper there. I can do it by myself, but with someone else is better. If I'm going by myself, I'll borrow my fiance's truck, and that I can pretty easily put in and out. And then finding a good kayak cart to get it down to the boat ramp is always helpful.
So when you borrow your boyfriend's truck, you can put it in the bed without having to have an extender or anything?
Correct. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
And
12-foot kayak.
It's a 12-foot kayak. Okay. In the beginning, you were talking about putting it up on the roof rack of your forerunner. And so that you do that sometimes. Yeah.
Yeah. That's kind of a 2-person job. So.
Yeah. Bri, how about you? How do you transport?
Thankfully, I have a pickup truck. Very, very helpful. I have a Tacoma, has a shorter bed, so I had to get the bed extender. My recommendations would be to strap down your gear very, very well.
Yeah, and I will put a third option out there. I did not want to have to lift my kayak up and put it on top of my vehicle, because I like you, Christi, I do kayak fish by myself quite frequently. So I opted to buy a light utility trailer that was recommended for my boat. And so I have a trailer hitch and I trailer my kayak to and from different locations. Now, I will mention that with a light utility trailer, often your speed limit is about 60 or 65. So if you're considering transporting a long distance or going on a trip, you're going to need a different option. There are lots of places where you cannot park a trailer. So if I wanted to go to the beach and launch, some particular spots I could not park at. So there are a lot of different considerations with regard to figuring out how you're going to get it from your house to the water. So those are some of the things to think about. How about tackle, you guys? Christi, what kind of tackle do you use and what do you recommend people get? Now, one thing that I want to particularly specify is when you're looking at rod length, rod butt length, rod tip length, what are your considerations? Because I think some people have different perspectives on that, and we can go into that. What do you think?
I don't spin fish inshore too much, but for offshore, I've got like a St. Croix. I don't know if they still make it, but it's a kayak fishing rod. So it has a longer butt. Inshore, I do a lot of fly fishing. We do a lot of trolling up here in Maine. So you can get a trolling fly rod that has a longer butt that fits in rod holders. Fly fishing, I just use my normal fly rods. I stand up a lot while I cast, but if you sit down, you want to keep your feet on the pedals, or else your fly line wants to get tangled around your pedals. But if you keep your feet on them, there's less to tangle.
Gotcha. So why do you prefer a longer rod butt?
just so it fits in the rod holders, especially for trolling. The small fly rods don't fit in the normal rod holders.
Right. Yeah. And definitely, yeah, if you're trolling, I can see that. Bri, what about you?
I'm using spinning gear, spinning tackle, and I pretty much don't have anything different than if I was to be using it on a boat or any other vessel. 7-foot rods. If it's a jigging rod, I'm 6 foot around there. Spinning reels offshore, I guess, is a little bit different. Most people use the conventional reels. I've been comfortable with those. They've worked for me, and that's my setup.
Christi, what length of rods do you prefer?
My fly rods for offshore are like 9 feet, and then inshore they're like 8 feet. The tip on the fly rod that like it won't fit in a rod holder, a fly rod.
So for spin or bait cast, what would you choose?
I think a lot of mine are in that 7-foot range.
Yeah, for me, inshore, I actually like a shorter butt because I'm maneuvering the rod butt around my PFD. And the shorter butt helps me not get stuck and caught. And I tend to like 7-foot rods too. Some people have said they like 6'9" rods. But to me, I'm, like I said, a smaller person. Being able to get that 7-foot rod all the way to the end of the 12-foot kayak is an important thing, in case you have something fairly large that wants to run around the boat. Even though, inshore, I'm not getting behemoth fish except for occasional shark. But anyway, those would be my preferences for the style of fishing I do. Bri, you mentioned when you're transporting, making sure that you lock everything down, bungee everything down. What are some of the things on board your boat that you do to make your day go smoother?
Leash your rods, especially if you're breaking through the surf. Leash your rods and leash your pedal drive. From experience, I can tell you that is very important to do that.
What about organization? Do you have any particular way you organize your gear on board?
For kayak fishing, you can't bring the whole garage, right? So you have to be concise with what you're bringing. You have to have the things that are critical to what you're going to be doing, what you're targeting, and you really don't need that much. For at least what I'm doing, you don't need that much. I usually bring one tackle box that I put under my seat. I have my 5/0 circle hooks and my leader line, my fluoro. Keep that all in a close proximity to where I'm working. And some of the kayaks have the mesh on the side that you can keep, braid scissors, your fluoro, your hooks, and I just keep it in a place that I know is accessible. And sometimes in the little storage container too, I'll put things that I may not want to just have flailing around in the kayak. I'll put extra jigs and stuff in there. I travel pretty simply when I'm offshore.
And one thing I think I wanted to mention just struck me, because you're talking about fishing offshore and you're going to take water, you're going to take waves and the boat's going to get wet. It's very important to have a kayak with scuppers.
Yes.
Some kayaks are not made with scuppers, but it's extremely important to have scuppers in a kayak because there's no freeboard. So you're going to take water, even when you're inshore, if the wind picks up and you've got chop, you're going to take some water. So that's an important consideration. But your comments too about not taking too much. I'm curious, since you target sailfish, do you drift baits? Do you take live baits? Do you have a live well system?
Yes, I do.
What do you use?
Well, it's the Hobie live well. It goes through the scupper and pretty much pumps in fresh water. If you get goggle eyes, you can get little pilchards. You drift some. I usually drift 2, and then I'm vertical jigging with another line. So if something gets hit, usually that happens as soon as I drop a jig down, and then I'm messing around with 3 lines. But I just wait for something like that to happen. It goes off, and then it's a ride after that.
Yeah, I'm sure it is. Christi, what do you think? What are some of the things you've learned about kayak fishing that you could pass along to beginners?
I find it's way easier if you bring a net, especially, for trout inshore. I used to fish a lot with my dog. So having a net. It gives you some extra time. It can be like very exciting when you catch a fish. And then you're like, you know, how do you bring it on board? Are you measuring it? Are you taking a picture of it? So having a net just, you know, helps the fish stay wet longer while kind of you get yourself together. And then, like Bri said, just pack light. Like really think of how many you know, flies you use when you go fishing. It's not that many. Like
Right. So yeah, narrow it down and be smart about it. How many rods do each of you take? Christi, how many rods do you have on board?
well, usually 3.
Okay. Bri, how many?
4 to 5, depending on what I'm targeting.
4 to 5. Okay. Yeah, I'm kind of with Christi, especially since I fish more inshore. I'm usually 3. Sometimes 2, depending on what the circumstances are. And if I'm really focusing on a particular species, and I can take 2 rods and be fine. What about safety gear? What do y'all recommend? Christi, what do you take on board for safety?
I mean, in Maine, it never gets that hot. So it's like not inconvenient to always wear your PFD. It adds a layer of warmth. And then especially offshore, I've got one of those orange kayak flags for safety. I mean, I always have my little emergency kit. It's got like a signal mirror and a whistle.
Any electronics?
No, not. I mean, in Maine, you pretty much, where I go, you always have self-service. So
Okay. Do you have actually a sonar and a chart plotter or sonar?
I have like a hummingbird fish finder on there.
Okay. Bri, what about you? Electronics and safety gear. What do you got?
Being in saltwater in Florida, you have to have a whistle, a light, and I always wear my PFD. I have one of the self-inflating ones or the ones with the CO2. You pull the string in it. So I'm always wearing that. Got my whistle, got my light, and then I keep a personal locator beacon on, and I also have a VHF radio. I have a signal too, one of the orange signals. It kind of replaced the flares. So I always keep that with me. I typically have cell phone service on the kayak. Sometimes when we go out in boats, we don't have it. So I always have the VHF just in case.
Yeah. Yeah. And the PLB in case you go over and can't catch the boat. Offshore, it definitely makes a difference. You have to be considering all of those things. I personally have a PLB because I do have a power boat. So I just carry that with me, and I carry a VHF, a handheld VHF radio as well. And I have a safety flag, and I wear my PFD. It is important to be thinking about safety when you're in a kayak because you don't have as many resources. You can't get back to the dock as quickly as you can with a boat. So, if something happens, you've got to be self-sufficient and you've got to be more or less independent. Hopefully y'all have never had any bad experiences on your boats, have you?
Nothing too major, no. Just
good.
No.
Good. Bri, anything?
I capsized. Yeah, it was a sailfish tournament, and I was coming back in, and the seas were, I don't know, 6 foot. Intervals were less than 5. Nobody should have been out there, but we don't cancel tournaments here. So it was on the way coming back in. Thankfully, I caught a sailfish in it. I was stoked, but it was coming back in. The beach landing got me, and I've been stuck in 2 storms offshore. They tell you not to go shallow, but to go out deeper. When you go in shallow, the break of the waves can get more intense. I stayed out deep and then eventually made my way in when the storm passed. But we had a couple boats sink that day. So I was very thankful that I got in.
Wow. Yeah, that's a little spooky. Christi, when you are guiding, are you guiding from your kayak, other kayak anglers? Is that what you do?
No, that's not. I guide like hiking and hunting and ice fishing. Yeah. But there are kayak angling guides. So if people are interested, Google it, see if there's one in your area, then you can try it out before you buy it. You can see what gear they have. You can learn some tips from them. So it's kind of like try before you buy. Yeah.
And I will also make a note, we talked a little bit about propulsion, paddle and pedal and trolling motor. And I live in an area where the tidal currents are very strong. We have 6 to 9 foot tides twice a day. So we have 2 highs and 2 lows, and the tides are six hours apart, and it can really crank the tidal currents. And I have found that using a paddle kayak around here is nearly impossible, not only because of those currents and trying to get back and forth to the ramp, but also because it's awfully hard to hold yourself in a spot with a paddle if the current is running so strongly. So for me, a pedal, even for an inshore kayak, a pedal kayak is preferred. I love the fact that with a pedal kayak, I can use both my hands to cast or grab a fish, lip a fish and unhook it, net a fish or whatever, I'm going to do. So it definitely is, to me, a necessity, almost more than anything. So, and I've tried the trolling motor kayaks and the ones that Old Town has, Christi, and I did enjoy it. It does feel a little like cheating, but oh my goodness.
There's a little bit of a learning curve, with the remote, but yeah, I mean, in Maine, we have huge tides, 20-foot swing twice a day. So
you have worse than we do.
And so when I striper fish, often I'm in like a tidal river. I've got a spot like right below a dam. So if I'm going for stripers a lot, I take the autopilot, and it has the spot lock feature. So then you don't even have to worry about the anchor. You turn that on and you really feel like you're cheating because you're sitting below a dam in a tidal river and you just stay in one spot.
Yeah. In that kind of a situation, it's not just a luxury, it's a necessity. So, I mean, it definitely has its place in certain fisheries for sure. So are there any other topics that you think we didn't touch on, things that have come to mind as we've discussed?
I think for a newcomer, if they have not caught a fish on a kayak before and it's a pedal drive, to make sure that when they're bringing the fish up and it's getting closer to the kayak, to make sure to split your feet so that it's flush. The pedals are flush with the vessel so that you don't get it stuck in the pedal drive, because that's never fun.
Yeah. It's kind of like getting your line wrapped on the trim tabs on the back of your boat. You just like, oh no. But yeah, definitely that's a key thing. And in terms of fighting fish, you don't have as much choice because the fish, if it's big, is going to kind of pull you. But are there any tips in terms of fighting big fish? For instance, Bri, in terms of fighting a sailfish, is there any particular aspect you do in terms of keeping the boat this direction or that direction, fighting the fish this way, or what do you do?
I try not to have the fish to my side. I try to kind of face the direction that the fish is going. So if it's just screaming line off the front, off the bow, I'm pedaling with it and following it. Big fish are going to move your kayak. Like I've gotten to the point of where it was creating a wake because you're holding on. So what is key is how you have your drag set. If it's too tight, it's going to pull you over. You're going to roll in the kayak. I got 2 fish for marlin in Mexico, and it took me hours to get a striped marlin up. It was a decent sized striped marlin, but it would just dog down and stay down. And so you're just holding. It was just an endurance battle between me and this fish. But I had a Shimano conventional reel, big reel. I just had it bent over my knee. It was just straight down and it stayed like that. And then all of a sudden it would just run. And if I didn't maneuver the kayak in the right direction, I probably would have rolled over with it.
Yeah.
I think I was in a PA 14, which is a very large boat. And it was hard for me to turn because it was such a big vessel. But eventually, once I got it to be kind of like parallel going in the same direction as the fish, I was able to land it after a couple hours.
That's good thing you're young. That's all I can say. Christi, any great fish stories on big stripers?
Nothing wild. It's fun to go out at night for stripers around here. But I was just thinking of a few other things I'd mention, like benefits to kayak fishing. You're much quieter if you're in the shallow sneaking up on fish. you can get shallower locations versus a boat, especially the specifically made fishing kayaks. They're very stable. You can stand up, so you get that better angle. So you can literally like see where the fish are and sneak up on them. So things that, boats don't always allow you to do.
Do you have any kind of a stabilization bar that you hold on to in your kayak, especially since you're talking about fly casting and that type of thing? Are you just depending on your own balance and that's it?
Yeah. I don't stand up when it's rough out, but
sure. Okay.
But yeah, they're pretty stable.
Yeah, the beam of some of these is fairly wide. I don't know what the beam is on your kayak, but obviously the longer a kayak is, the more beam it can handle. You're going to have a beamier boat if you have a longer boat. Same principle with a regular fishing boat. If you really need more stable platform, you need to find a bigger boat with a longer LOA and a wider beam. So those are also some considerations. I don't stand very often. And that's another reason why I like the short butt rods, is because I'm constantly like this, and a shorter butt rod is going to be easier to cast, especially if your hands and your arms are up kind of up here as opposed to down here. They also are lighter weight. So I'm not my shoulders are not having to support, a heavier rod. So anyway, it's interesting that everybody kind of has different experiences. A lot of it depends on where you fish and how you fish, and, and what you've gotten used to as well. So
I was just going to add, different kayaks have different hull designs. My Salty is made for the ocean, and it's got a nice W hull. It's and it's really fast and made. So you can get kayaks, once you decide, do you live in the Midwest and you're never going on the ocean? Well, you don't need that type of hull.
Okay. Well, I don't know that I've seen hulls touted for offshore or inshore use. Is Old Town doing that? Are they particularly marketing toward an offshore fisherman?
They just say, what hull is more stable than
Gotcha.
other hulls. So
okay. All right. Well, thanks, y'all. I appreciate you joining me today. And I feel like we need to go get our boats and go fishing somewhere, maybe down where Bri is, because it sure looks nice right there. Yeah, come on down from Maine, Christi, and let's fish in the Florida sun. So
it's gonna be like minus 20 here, and this weekend.
I can't even imagine. I just can't even imagine. All right. Well, thank you again so much. I appreciate y'all both being here, and tight lines.